This is going to be a discussion panel on something very important, which is kind of navigating technology trends, using that to leverage that to the advantage of your career. And that's always tricky because most employers are interested in the new stuff, but they're not going to adopt it right away. So how are you going to kind of negotiate that? Hopefully you'll get a lot of insight on that from our speakers. And they include Lhotka, CTO at Magenic, also a co-chair of Visual Studio Live, Francois Charette, who's SVP of Engineering at OptumInsight, Martin Leifker, VP of Digital Innovation and Solutions at Texas Mutual Insurance Company. And let me turn it over to your moderator, Matt Lockhart, Executive Vice President at Magenic. Guys, go for it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Andrew, a great job on the pronunciation, especially of Francois' name, which isn't necessarily so easy. So, how many Sesame Street fans do we have in the audience? I grew up, right? I mean, yeah, there you go, right? And so you'll all remember that jingle, one of these things is not like the other one, right? And I think that kind of represents our talk here today, because you will not see one line of code presented in our session, which I think may make this session a little bit more unique. And to kick us off, and thank you for the introductions, Andrew, but I'd like to turn it over to our esteemed panelists for you to introduce yourselves, kind of why you're here and what got you interested in talking, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Francois.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Francois Charette. I'm responsible for product engineering for Optum. Optum is part of United Health Group. My team support about 350 products, ranging from 4 different markets: the payer market, provider market, life science, as well as government market. And we basically have a little bit of everything. I'm really excited to be here today because I want to talk a little bit about the cultural changes that my organization has gone through. How do you become an agile company when you are such a large enterprise and the number of products that we support? So hopefully I can provide that perspective on the things that we're doing that's a little bit unique within Optum.
Great.
Hi, I'm Lhotka. I'm the CTO at Magenic, and the value I hope to provide here is Magenic has been around for 22 years, and we've got around 700 consultants around the US. And so over that period of time, we've, of course, had to adapt, like all of you, and we end up being very responsive to our customers' requests as to what technologies or what process trends are going on. And so I'm going to try and represent a lot of the bigger trends that we've observed, or I've observed, based on all of the customers we've got around the country.
Hi, I'm Martin Leifker. I'm the VP of Digital Innovation and Solutions at Texas Mutual Insurance Company, based in Austin. I lead our internal digital innovation group. So in my career, I was traditionally on the IT side, but always closely associated with the business. And luckily for me, those two worlds have come together, and I have this opportunity for this hybrid role. As an organization, we're partnered with Magenic to try and go through this transformation, but we're really new in it. So I'm learning as much as you guys here are today.
Well, that's great. And it is, it's a tough discussion. Our goal is to sort of break through the hype. When you talk about technology trends, a lot of these things are marketing driven. We get bombarded, be it from the Forresters or the Gartners or the, IDCs, and these are the things that you've got to do, and if you're not doing these things, you're behind. Well, the reality is that that's all future stuff. So how do we, start with what are the trends, and then break it down to what really matters to all of us as technologists? So, first question, what are the trends, if you will, that really matter in your environments? What are the things that you guys are looking forward to? Francois?
I can start. For us, being a healthcare company, big data is a big deal. So we're definitely making significant investment in machine learning, deep learning capabilities, really understanding how do we apply these technology to transactional solutions. So at the end of the day, you need to be able to get data find some insight with that data, and then provide that back to people that are actually providing care. That is not something simple to do. So that's one big trend that we're going after. Two is cloud. Healthcare, like everything else, is a little bit behind from a technology point of view related to security of the cloud. So there's people concerned that the cloud might not be as secure as on-premise infrastructure, really related to protecting our private information for our member. Obviously, the most important thing for us is the member privacy. And there's a perception that the public cloud is not as secure as the internal cloud, which is something that we've been working through the process right now to really eliminate, because the reality is the public cloud is actually more secure than our internal infrastructure. And that enables us to be a lot more nimble to the market. So really leveraging some cloud technology to build products that can evolve with the size of the clients that you're dealing with. If you build a product with an internal infrastructure in place, you usually have to start really big to start with. So leveraging elasticity in the cloud has been a big component of our technology going forward.
Interesting. Martin?
Yeah, so for me particularly, it's this notion of a digital customer experience. So as a company, we've had a ton of automation to help us be an efficient company, but taking that to the next level and creating a customer experience that's easy and intuitive and something that's as boring as workers' comp is the big challenge for us, right? And so that, and then the way that agile methodologies support being able to get out what our customers value. Those are the two big trends we're looking at.
Interesting. Rocky, you're kind of our thought leader. You know, you're the one who is looking at the hype and trying to direct us as to what really matters. So what are those things that are, you know, are on top of your brain?
Well, I would kind of break it maybe into three different categories, in that one of them are the technologies that are key, and there's a whole lot of them that I think you can attach yourself to around big data or around DevOps and a lot of scripting or automation, but obviously around web development or mobile development, right? And I think probably most of you have a pretty good sense of that, and I say that because the rooms that have the kind of the trendier topics tend to be full, right, here at VS Live. But then the second thing I would say is, you know, we often toss around the word agility or agile, and of course that means different things, right? It means that we have to be responsive to the needs of the business, and it also is a methodology, right? Scrum, Agile, whatever. But I think you can apply it personally too, in that all of us need to work to be agile, because the reality is that the technologies are changing and the business requirements are changing, and our industry is in the middle of something quite fun, right? And so we have to be agile as individuals and be able to adapt. And then the third thing that I think is really important, and this took me a long time in my career, is that you have to step outside of technology to really achieve your full value. And I had a boss and mentor early in my career who was I was very tech focused. And he's like, you gotta, you know, sometimes sit back and like look around and understand the business that you're trying, you know. And then I was in biomedical manufacturing. He's like, you've got to learn at least some of the business. And I'm like, nah, no, I'm a technology guy. But it's true, right? Your career is substantially helped if you are able to step back and get an understanding of whatever industry or vertical you're in addition to the technology.
Well, I think that'll be sort of the things that we'll try to unpackage and say, well, what really matters, or what are some of the best practices, and then what are some of the, you know, sort of the gaps and or failures that you're seeing in those things. But first, digital, right? You can't, you know, turn around without seeing the word digital, and then digital transformation. So, yeah, maybe let's start and define what does that really mean, right, and to your organizations and to your customers. So, Francois.
Right, I mean, digital transformation for me is an interesting little term, because from my perspective, it's really an evolution. I mean, you're all writing software today, that's all digital today. So there's different characteristics with the digital transformation. The first one is around consumerism, from my perspective. It's really giving the users the functionality they need in their hands. And if you look at any mobile application you have today, it's always instant gratification. You use the application, you know you get the information you need at that point in time. I think the biggest thing with transformation that we need to look at is all of the back-end solution that supports these front-end applications. Historically, people have created mobile application without really changing how the back-end solutions work effectively. And you really need to get a point where it's real-time transactions. If you look in a healthcare perspective, if you go to the physician, your expectation is to see your bill on your phone immediately. Well, the back-end process, it takes 30 days to get a claim set up for the processing process. So creating a mobile application that gives you that information really becomes irrelevant without changing the back-end. You're really getting to more the real-time transaction. The second piece, from my perspective, in an industry like healthcare, it's looking at anything that's paper. There's still a lot of paper, believe it or not, that's still getting exchanged between physicians. So a lot of fax are going from physician to physician. A lot of paper claims go to the process. Really pushing hard on elimination of paper to the process, which are going to require the industry to really change. Because today, the healthcare industry and the interoperability between applications is very difficult. EMRs don't talk with each other. So if Matt goes to a physician in the morning and as radiology perform, he goes to another physician in the afternoon, they're not going to have the information. So creating the interoperability between the platform is really critical for us, and that's the digital transformation from a healthcare perspective.
Interesting. Martin?
I think the big transition for me from non-digital to digital is thinking about technology as the primary enabler of the customer experience. I hear a lot from my business constituents, yeah, but what if they don't want technology? If technology works well, I don't know of anybody who doesn't want technology as their primary way of getting service now. It can be faster, it can be more intuitive. And so it's that shifting around from a mindset of technology helps us run our business to technology is our business. It is the primary way that our customers are going to interact with us. And for me, then it gets to ease of use and let them move on with their lives as quickly as possible. You're right, consumer expectations are everywhere now. So they expect the same thing from us as a workers' comp company as they do from Amazon.
Yeah, okay, so if we could sort of say two primary tenets of it is the experience and the customer experience, and sort of the customer is driving the priority of what's needed, and then the real-time aspect, right, and real-time data and or real-time changes. What defines a good customer experience for, what are you hearing from your customers? What are you measuring as to what is a great customer experience versus a so-so experience that's going to result in, 2 stars on the App Store?
Right, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. So one of the measure that we look at as an enterprise is the Net Promoter Score that looks at how clients are satisfied with the services and the product that they receive. Unfortunately, the NPS score gets calculated maybe once a year. So you don't really get real-time feedback. If you look at the mobile applications, the 5-star rating, most of those don't get that many positive feedback. They get negative feedback when you push something to production, there's a quality problem with it. So trying to get really real-time feedback has been something that's been puzzling to us. So this year we deployed the SUS survey, which is the System Usability Scale Survey, which enables us to query the users in real time. So we built it within the application, very simple questions to get feedback about how the applications perform. We're also using web analytics to understand which users are using which features, and then we actually target these users based on what we release. So if we have a brand new features that we release, and that set of users are using it effectively, we'll go after these users. So we don't create just a bunch of survey for everybody. That information creates a SUS score, and there's a direct relationship with the NPS score. So that's one way for us to identify and get real-time feedback from clients. Obviously, there's the standard product management aspect where you got to engage with your clients on the front end. We also have a dedicated user experience lab where we do user studies as well as user-based studies directly with our users. So it's the investment that needs to be made in that field. From my perspective, that is probably above and beyond anything, right? It doesn't matter if you got the sexiest application out there, but if it doesn't fulfill a need in the marketplace, you defeat the purpose.
Interesting. Yeah, real value, if you will.
Yeah.
Martin, any additional thoughts in terms of what's a great customer experience? What are you guys driving towards for your customers?
Yeah, so intuitive and easy is the bottom line. So if they can get through that without asking a question or having that moment of what the heck does this mean, then we've succeeded. Every time my team's come to me in the last couple of months and said, hey, what should we put in this help text? My answer is you don't, because if we need help text, we failed, right? And it needs to be that simple and straightforward through the process. In terms of measuring, we're not there yet. You know, I think for us, it's, if they couldn't get through the digital channel, we got a call, and that's the place we're at in terms of measurement right now.
Interesting. So Rocky, let's start to sort of think about how do we enable this, right? How do we, within our teams, as leaders, as team members, as, you know, we all have the opportunity to drive change through our practices, right? What are some of the, you brought up agility and or working in that agile mindset. What makes for somebody who's going to be a better agile leader versus not?
Well, I think what's interesting, if we listen to these, you know, you guys were both talking about mobile consumer-faced websites or maybe mobile apps and that consumer experience, but then Francois also was talking about getting rid of paper. And I think if you kind of trace this through, you know, some of us are front-end developers, right? We build websites or we build mobile apps, but, you know, to your point, what you were just saying, if the app doesn't actually do anything useful in the end, right, then what good was it? And so this thing flows through all the way from the top to the bottom, right, from the user experience through the web servers or whatever servers back into the back-end processes that are hardcore enterprise software, all the way back into the database, and then the ability to create cubes and other analytic tools in order to massage or examine trends, right? And if any of those components are not agile, then the whole thing starts to fall apart, right? Because you've created a roadblock in the process. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is regardless of you know, some of you might be like, well, I don't do any front-end stuff. I'm a back-end person, right? And that's awesome, but you also need to be highly responsive to the business requirements and become very, very agile. And so this is a pervasive sort of transformation in a lot of organizations. And so, you know, from a practical perspective, this means that getting in line with being iterative and being responsive in a short term as individuals and dev teams, right? But also in terms of the technology and having as much automation as possible, CI builds, automated unit testing, automated builds and releases and so forth, because these are the things that help, you know, really allow you to focus on the business requirements and not spend half your time, you know, manually running build steps or deployments and all this other sort of thing.
And Martin, you mentioned that you guys are earlier on in your journey of being agile, and we talked a whole bunch in preparation that, you know, agile isn't a dev process, and, you know, I think you speak about the pervasiveness of it, where it's a mentality, it's a business mentality, right, that creates competitive advantage. As you guys are earlier on, you know, what are the right things that you've done to enable and promote, you know, starting on the journey?
I think it's, as you were saying, Rocky, recognizing that it's not just a development team issue, right? So we're pushing really hard on the business side to think about things in a different way from a product perspective, and then we're engaging with our infrastructure folks to make sure that they're along for the ride as well, right? And so we're silos or specialization, whatever you want to call it, we're making sure that we attack that in a way that it starts to build this cohesive team that gets used to working together with one another, and they start to feel that camaraderie towards developing this product as a team.
Interesting. And, you know, Francois, you mentioned that you don't have dev leads, right? And I thought that was a pretty interesting sort of little nuance, if you will. Tell us a little bit more about why you changed from dev leads to, what do you call them now?
Engineering delivery leads.
Okay.
But first, before we get there, let's get you guys engaged a little bit. So Raise your hand if you're writing code today. If your job is to write code. Great. Who's responsible for testing? Raise your hand. Okay. Who's responsible for monitoring the application in production and making sure it's working properly? So here's the deal. Agile, and you mentioned it, right? There's a process that you can do agile, but that doesn't mean you're actually being agile. So everybody should have been raising their hands on these three different questions. Everybody needs to be testing. Everybody needs to basically be writing code in some form or another. It could be automation code, it could be unit testing scenarios. It could be writing code for monitoring production. And everybody is responsible for creating the right requirements, be part of the team. So there's a significant cultural changes that needs to occur as part of the process. So a few years ago, and by the way, we've been on our journey now for the last 8 years, and it's been bumpy, but now we're at a point where our teams are truly being agile. We now have engineering delivery leads that their job is to be accountable for the product from an end-to-end perspective. So they are responsible for their team, and they actually look at understanding their requirements, making sure they have the right development activities, make sure we have the right regression and automation scenarios, make sure that we're pushing new techniques around unit testing, make sure we have the right deployment process in production and the right DevOps initiative. And really, they're responsible to also push new technology. So their responsibility level is increasing significantly. And that's not necessarily somebody that was a coder historically. So within our group, we basically have people that were test engineers that now are engineering delivery leads. We have product owners and engineers as well. So you've got to make that cultural shift, and that is not just technology, but also the business. The business needs to shift as well.
Interesting. And so, you know, everybody should raise their hands for I'm responsible for dev and test and monitoring, but is anybody in the room responsible for actually creating value?
Everybody is.
I mean, so how, right? Because, you know, there's historically, and we've seen this with our customers, where there's this sort of this friction, if you will, between traditionally the business and then IT, right? And as you know, as the IT or the tech or the development group, well, look, you just tell me what I need to do, right? And then, you know, I'm going to be the most effective guy at getting it done. How do we as technologists break down that wall, break down those silos to understanding and creating greater value? Martin.
I think the agile process helps that, right? Because it eliminates the, hey, we're going to think about requirements for a couple months, and then we'll go away for 5 months, and now when you delivered something, it wasn't what I really wanted, or the requirement changed, or whatever it is, right? And so I think this process helped us get at that. And then making that a cohesive team and stopping with the business does something and the technology team does something is key to it, right? Everybody's in it. And I know, Francois, you talked about, you measure the success of the team and what they're delivering. Ultimately, that's how you drive that accountability.
Francois, any?
No, I think you really need to push the team to be accountable. So we measure our team based on the ability to deliver. We also look at team productivity. And then when there's an issue with either a production defect was leaked to production or missed on the delivery, it's the team that takes a step back and they do a root cause analysis. And that continuous improvement is really important as part of the process. So we actually push our team to really understand what is the root cause. Truly, what is the root cause? Why did we miss? And that's not about pointing fingers, because now the teams are completely working together. The product owners are embedded within the Scrum teams, and they're basically co-located with our teams. So there's no more finger pointing going on. It's all about doing one thing and one thing only. It's deliver a good product to the market.
Interesting. Rocky, what have we seen in terms of what works well within our teams, but then within our customers' environments to start to break down these silos, right? And create that self-governing team who are all interested in value.
Yeah, I think the key here is, I think none of us up here are saying that you should stop being a specialist, right? Because it's important if you're really, really good at the TypeScript, JavaScript, Angular, or you know whatever, or you're really good at doing machine learning and setting that up, that's all required. right? What we're really talking about is a meta layer, and the agile process done well says, hey, take your specialized expertise and then become a good communicator to also find somebody that represents the business, because that's their specialization then, and then collaborate and have a collaborative team. And I think to a lot of organizations, this is a culture change, and we certainly see this. Being consultants, we come into a lot of different organizations around the country, and some of them have a pretty healthy collaborative culture, but a lot of them don't, and I'm sure many of you have encountered that, or maybe you sadly work in that today. But that seems like step one to overcome, right? Is there has to be this sense of common goal between the business and the the IT infrastructure folks and the developer folks and the testing folks, and so you were saying that everybody's responsible for testing, for example, which is true, or everybody's responsible for business outcomes, which is true, but the way that you contribute to the business outcome might be by being the most amazing PowerShell scripting automation engineer that you can possibly be, right? And so I think it's really, it comes down to this concept, and there are different roles and titles that you can throw into this mix, and that probably depends a lot on the structure of your particular organization. But at the end of the day, right, it's having that shared common goal. And you had told me a story right before we got up about as you started this whole transformation in your organization, about the kind of the top level support, which I think is key, right, to get this leadership. And sorry if I step into the moderator role here, but I would love if you would share that story.
Sure. So our CEO is passionate about this change. And so we created this standalone group. I report directly to the CEO as our digital innovation team. But my first problem was I wanted a space where we were co-located. So my first bold move as a leader was to knock on my new boss's door and ask him if he'd move offices, because his office was big enough for my team to move into, to co-locate inside of. He moved to a smaller office and let my team have that room. So that's dedication, that's support, right? It buys me a lot of juice around
How many
the
of you think
organization.
your CEOs are going to give up their office for your agile team?
Not a lot of hands go
Not a lot
up
of
there.
hands. I don't know. That's
No.
just really impressive. That's
So by a show of hands, and one of the aspects of being better is understanding our customers. So let's do that in real time. How many of you are on an agile journey? How many of you are in an agile environment today, and or you're being pushed to do that more? Well, it's interesting, you don't see as many hands as I would have thought of, right? Because we sort of see this as a leading sort of indicator of driving better software, right? We're living in that software-driven world. So, but let's adjust a little bit and say, Francois, we talked about, well, competitive advantage means kind of two things: speed with keeping a quality bar. So how do we be better at being faster? And let's talk a little bit about the environments and the technologies that are necessary, and then we'll talk a little bit about the practices that enable being faster to create a competitive advantage.
Right, yeah, so it's, speed is critical. Like I said, clients are looking for instant gratification. So really providing the ability where you have the right set of technologies to really develop very quickly and iteratively. I think that's really, really critical to the success of any agile project. So if you're trying to do agile in an old COBOL type model, you might create better requirements, but are you going to be a lot faster at the end? That's debatable. So getting the right platform is important. But if you start delivering more and more software to production in a quicker fashion, you still need to do it with very solid quality. That means you need to automate a whole lot than what you've done historically. So continuous integration, continuous delivery discipline needs to be established within the teams. And it starts with the proper unit testing scenarios, the right regression testing scenarios. You want to do automation in sprint, which I'm sure most of you would be interesting to find out how many people actually does functional test automation in sprint here. got 3 hands, 4 handful of people, right? That is absolutely a requirement for you to be able to go and truly start doing continuous delivery to the market. You need to have the right security controls in place. So security is important as well, especially within our process. There are some static code analysis tools that you can actually build within your build process as well. So every piece of software that my team builds basically goes to an automated build process every time somebody checks in code. The unit test scenario are run, and then they actually have thresholds in terms of the percentage of code coverage they need to fulfill. If it fails, it kicks back to the developer. We run the regression test scenarios on it. We run our basically fortified scan, which is an HP solution, and then we run sonar on it to be able to identify if there is any critical issues. We basically fail the build. People think that's kind of over the top, and the reality is, from an engineer, if you get real-time feedback about your code, it's really, really easy to solve the problem. And what we've seen is an increase in productivity through that process. And then you need to have deployment capabilities in your production environment to be able to do that. So we have A/B testing that we started creating with feature flags, where you can deploy a feature to production and just deploy it to a small set of users to test it in production. And you do that, you look at web analytics and how it's being used, and you get feedback on that feature. If it works appropriately, you can actually turn it on, or if it doesn't work, you can pull it back. We're now starting doing some of that, but if you look at Facebook, that's Facebook methodology. They don't do any testing. They push it right to production. That is, from my perspective, the ultimate place to go, which will drive quality and drive really quickness to the marketplace.
A greater experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Martin, you're setting up, and you talked a little bit about you're learning by doing within your environment. And what are the right things that you're starting to incorporate to increase the cycle times, to increase the speed at which you're getting your work done, as well as then getting value out to your customers?
I'll give a pitch to you guys first. We picked somebody who's been down this road before, right? So everything that you described that you've fought through over 8 years, I'm hoping to take the shortcut on, because we're working with people who've done this. So integrated, CI/CD practices, automated testing, everything from the get-go is what we're trying to build our new products in.
And, when we talk about the aspect of, trends to technology to then your career, right? One of the things, that Francois, and just to kind of give you an idea of the scale, how many people work in your organization?
We have 2,300 engineers globally.
Yeah, and that's within your group.
Within my group.
And then within the overall Optum business, how many?
Within all of Optum Technology, who supports all of UHG, it's about 30,000 employees.
That's a small group, right? How do you think about the scale of that transformation, and it's been 8 years. I mean, was that somebody else's? How do you get started? How does a team become more effective? Is it one individual that's coming in from the outside, or how does that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've seen, and our journey started with, we basically ripped the Band-Aid and said everybody's going to go to Agile. And really the first couple of years we were doing Agile. You start doing project reviews, and you look at the way they were doing the work as very small iterative process every 2 weeks. So you roll code and you give it to a QA guy within that 2 weeks. And so it's through the coaching process and training process. We've seen 2 key things that enable teams to be successful. One is to get an engineer that really gets it into the team, bottom up, right? And we've had tremendous success hiring new college graduate that comes in with no conceived notion about what it means to be a software engineer. So they come in and we let them go, right? We tell them, you're responsible for helping with a CI/CD platform. These guys go learn the technology, and they really help elevate the team. So that's one aspect that has worked really well for us. The second aspect is the leader. Bring somebody in that can really push the team towards leveraging newer technology. And these leaders don't have to be a coder. They just need to really understand how technology works. So we've had really good test engineers that are now our engineering delivery lead that's driving the process. We have product owners that have become engineering delivery lead, and these guys are just pushing their team, not only from making sure that we are delivering the product we said we would, but make sure the team continues to evolve by leveraging newer technology and applying good techniques from an agile perspective.
Yeah. Well, Rocky, you've sort of, you talked about this a little bit at earlier aspect of your career where, no, I just want to write code. You know, how did you, and I think that you sort of increased your value to your organization when you broke out of that mindset, and talk a little bit about your own transformation or growth, if you will, that you went through, because I think that that's, you know, anybody can be that leader. Anybody can be that smart spark to make the team better, to create greater value, to create that competitiveness. And so how did that happen for yourself?
Well, it was painful, for me at least, because I love the technology, and for folks that have seen me speak or whatever probably appreciate that. But I had a boss and a mentor in particular. I guess is probably the better term. We all have bosses, right? But Dan was a mentor for me, and mentors sometimes push you to places that you're not comfortable, such as, why don't you take the lead on gathering the requirements and talking to the folks that run inventory for this new feature that we were building? I'm like, I don't know anything about inventory, and I don't like talking to people. But it's part, so part of it, I guess, was self-driven in that, Dan, my mentor, made it pretty clear that it was, over time, career limiting not to be able to have these interpersonal skills. And he directly, I kid you not, pushed me into these uncomfortable situations. But then he would coach. He'd be like, so how did that conversation go? What did you get out of it? Let's come up with a plan on how we're going to build that feature. And through that, he and I would go through this, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have asked this, or I wish I would have asked that, or I wish I would have understood this thing behind the inventory process. And you start to kind of understand the value of these things. And so it was not necessarily an easy or fun transition for me, but in the end, it obviously, at least I think, was phenomenal, because I still get to do all the technology stuff that I truly love, but I actually now have a much deeper appreciation of the impact that it has inside of different organizations, which is a lot more fulfilling, and I'm able to do a better job, I think.
Yeah, it's sort of like, well, if you're doing it for a reason, right?
Yep.
And part of the reason that we've seen in our more successful teams is that we talk about this self-governing team, or the desire to make the team better, right? And so there's sort of the business value, which is you're releasing great software, but then you're also having the opportunity to make your teammates better. And there's a reason, right? There's a reason for increasing your skills a bit. Martin, we talked a little bit about the fact that we're not writing everything anymore. Back at the beginning of your career, I think it was C and maybe some assembly, Rocky, that you were doing, and you had to write a whole bunch of code to get anything done, and that's not the case anymore. Martin, talk a little bit about how you're enabling this environment of stitching together tools and or frameworks that enable you to be faster and better.
So the first step of that was talking with the traditional developers on my team about this notion of, part of your job is assembling components that are already built. And there's always going to be custom code that's needed, so that's not going away, right? Mm-hmm. But helping them understand, we can get at that value faster and get you on to the next thing if you can be very effective at kind of this plug-and-play model. So, frankly, one of my developers said, no, I'm a developer, I don't want that role, right? And he found someplace else in the organization where he could code all day long. But sure. It's going to find him. I don't think he's going to be able to hide from it.
Yeah. So Francois, do we think that we're moving to that no-code, low-code platform of the future where the skills that we've got in this room aren't really necessary anymore?
Yeah, I'm a little doubtful about this, and I used this example earlier where If you look at BI solutions, and I've deployed BI solution in my career probably a handful of times. You first deploy the solution, you build these standard reports, and the first thing that the users will ask you is, can you provide ad hoc reporting? So you go through the process, provide ad hoc reporting, create training and documentation, deploy it to 200 people, and there's 2 people using it in the business side because they're the most technical people in the group. They always go back to the engineering team. We end up using the ad hoc reporting capability to create reports. So I think we're a long way away from that. Same thing with Rules Engine. If you look at Rules Engine, technically business users should be able to write rules. The reality is their engineers are going to write the rules after the fact. I think that software is as much an art as it is a science. And just trying to replace that with AI is going to be very difficult. The other piece to that, it's kind of conflicts with the agility process because in order to get the AI model to work properly, you need to define all your requirements on the front end. Yeah. So you sort of defeat the purpose a little bit from an agile perspective. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I think it'll enable and support teams, but I don't think it's going to replace the team.
Well, Rocky, we've internally had this discussion, right? And we've seen some of our sales leaders and whatnot. Oh, we got to look at this no-code stuff. We got to be able to do that. That's going to be the future. What do you say when people come forward and talk about that?
Yeah, so we're all out of a job, right? Or so you might feel. But what I say is this: that when I was in university, I did an internship. And was writing some code to do some what we would now call data analytics or whatever, but it was like literally writing Pascal to put and the director of IT at the organization I was at came around and was like, oh, you're an intern that's writing some code. Yeah, that's pretty cool, but you realize that in 5 years nobody's going to write code anymore. And this was in the 80s. And I was depressed though, right? Because here I am, whatever I was, 18, 19-year-old college student being told that my entire future, which I loved dearly, was dead. And because at that point it was something called CASE. It was just going to wipe out software development. And that came and went. And then a few years later, there was these things called 4GLs, fourth generation languages. So this would have been, I suppose, in the 90s by this point. Again, going to completely wipe out anything that we think of as software development because we'll use 4GLs. They came and went. And then what was next? Software factories, I think, was the next iteration of this idea. It was really trendy a while ago, 10 years ago. A few of us will be fortunate enough to write the software that writes the software. But all the rest of you are out of work, right? And then strangely enough, how many are using a software factory today, right? And then DSLs, domain-specific languages, same kind of idea. We're not going to, somebody in C# or Java or whatever C will write a domain-specific language so that the business users can write all of the code. How many are using DSLs? Right? I don't buy it. Clearly, after 30 years of being told my career is gone, we're still here. So.
Well, I mean, on those same lines, the cloud's probably just a fad that's going to go away as well, right?
Sure.
Nah, I don't think so, right? I mean, so by a show of hands, how many are working in a public cloud or building, solutions towards a public cloud environment? It's a big group. Right? Let's sort of transition into sort of the next-gen technologies, if you will, that enable this, right? If our goal is increasing value through a better experience by having speed, but keeping a quality bar at, what we all believe in, and then, there's this security thing that I think is starting to become a little bit more and more important. What are the technologies that enable being effective in this environment? When you think about what are the must-haves and/or where are we going to, right, in terms of future technologies that are enabling this? Francois.
Well, I think the The security on the cloud is definitely going to be, it's important, obviously. If you look at all of the security breaches that have occurred on applications that were hosted on a cloud platform, the actual cloud platform was not the issue. The issue was the actual application or the controls that were implemented for the specific application. So there is more and more responsibility that lies as part of the delivery team than we've had in the past related to security. So I think these are some core elements that need to be required. One is you need to have your developers do security training. They need to understand what SQL injection is all about and how you create SQL injection and all within your solution. So that is one thing that people need to start investing in. The second piece is investing in a tool, so static code analysis as well as web scanning tools. And if you're lucky like we are, we actually are having a penetration testing teams as well that just focus on trying to hack our own solution. So I think the cloud is really critical for go-to-market. I think the ability to write a small application to compete on really the smaller market that we're competing with. A lot of our competitors right now are startup companies that sell to our smaller clients that we have difficulty competing with. The ability for us to go to the cloud, leveraging its elasticity and building the application right from the get-go and sell to a small client without it being outpriced is important to us. And then as you start to sell to the large Aetna and Humana and the large clients, and you can use elasticity to grow that. I think that's really, really important.
Interesting. You know, Martin, yesterday you had to jump onto a phone call and do some advocating. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The specific use case here is Sauce Labs as a automated testing environment, and we're going that route based on y'all's suggestion. But internally, the concern was, hey, our tests are going to be run there, therefore sensitive data could potentially be there. Let's look at their audit reports to make sure that everything's where it needs to be. Well, as a $500 a month customer, they're not willing to hand those over, and we have to get into these conversations as an organization about what the risk really is. And so, you know, this move faster and take advantage of all these tools, absolutely, right? There's benefit there. But you also have to pay attention to the security concerns are real, and you need to make sure you're doing your homework to make sure that everything is safe and secure. And we got approval from the golf course too, so that was
Just a plug on this. Right after lunch, there's across the hall will be a talk on security. Ideally security without slowing everything down, right? Because that's really the problem for all of us as developers, is those security guys are the enemy, because they stop us from doing real work, right? But so anyway, there will be a talk after lunch about that. So.
And you know, Rocky, when you think about from an architectural, next generation architecture that enables all this good stuff to happen, and it's probably some of the sessions that are more interesting. What are some of our most popular sessions at Live 360 that represent those next generational architectural and/or development and/or operational capabilities?
Yeah, I think clearly Angular, React, the web, TypeScript are the room fillers, and I'm sure many of you have observed that fact. But security within the context of an Angular client side, that's a tough challenge, and so and the challenge falls on us as developers too. Right? It's not on the tools, like Francois says. It's not like these platforms inherently are insecure. In fact, the platforms are typically inherently very secure. But it's us that sometimes will handle an encryption key just a little improperly, and you open that gap, or things like that, and it's tricky, right? And so having somebody that can, ideally static code analysis tools help, because they have these rules already coded into them. And using that sort of a tool, or an expert, but humans tend to be fallible. So it's challenging. And so around here we've got the Tech Mentor. There's a lot of focus there on infrastructure-based security, and then on the VS Live and Modern Apps Live side, there's some talks that either explicitly or on security, like the one after lunch, but then also other talks that where security kind of works its way in, because it's not, we talk about security like it's a thing, but it's actually pervasive, right? If you're not thinking about it all the time, you end up, like you said, with a SQL injection error just because of one line of code, right? Somebody wasn't thinking just at that point in time. They didn't have their coffee. They didn't have their water.
Martin, you sort of surprised me a little bit, in which, Martin's the boss, Francois is the boss, but you talked about, the need to drive this understanding of containerization and microservices, in your organization, and not just in your tech organization, but in product management and product ownership and getting that mindset. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think it really goes back to the eliminating the silos piece, right? And so for this to be effective, everybody needs to better understand everybody else's roles. And so in the past, where the business person could say, here's my requirement, I don't care how you get there, now they need a little more insight into how, because that'll let them more effectively lay out those requirements. And that passes on down the chain. So, that's the beauty of this agile process and getting a team working together cohesively.
Interesting. And Francois, you've created an interesting method to enable innovation of new technologies, where you're bringing teams from the production teams and bundling them together with the innovation groups. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, so innovation is really critical. There's always new technology that are becoming available. Emerging technology research really just sits within the team. We have a very small handful of people that supports our existing teams, and we basically challenge the team, look at new technology and try to apply that to your product. But we also have a very formal process where looking at newer technology, for example, right now we're doing something with blockchain. We partner with a research team that's internal to us, and we bring in our own development team to be part of that process. And what we've done, and we time box the process to a month. So within a month, you got to go in and deliver value and show value within that month. And the reason why we time box it that way is after a month, you're either going to have to kill it because we don't believe there's value associated with that, or if it brings value, then you roll it into the standard roadmap and put that as part of our process. So we want to really iterate to the process very quickly, because what we've seen is if you leave a research group go, they're going to build a product without having good market inputs, and that doesn't meet anybody's requirements.
Yeah. So. Well, and one of those things is, AI, machine learning. It's one of, again, thinking in that digital world, and we're getting blasted, and yet the reality is, well, nobody's kind of really doing this at scale or in production. But as technologists, should we be caring about that, right? I mean, so how do you guys think about with your teams and your individual members on your teams? What sort of encouragement and/or coaching would you give them to how they need to be thinking about these things that you're not going to be using in production today, but you think that there may be value tomorrow? Martin?
So first of all, I think one of the big challenges that we haven't figured out consistently is, even if you have a great machine learning model, how do you productionize that? And so starting to pull the data science people into your agile delivery team so you can start to work through that process and how it works and how you update the model when it needs to change and all those things. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we started. For us, it's still a big challenge, right? The hype has not yet, or the reality has not yet caught up with the hype in our world. But it sure feels like everybody else in the world has figured this out. I tend to think they're fibbing a little bit.
That's true, right? Everybody here, you've got a good AI, machine learning.
Yeah, we're all doing it.
So sort of we're keeping everybody from lunch. So in kind of closing up, Francois, talk to us about, you guys have had a lot of success in becoming better, and you talked a little bit about it. It really gets down to the individual. And so what are some of those characteristics that the individuals, that you see in the individuals that enable, your teams and your organization to be better, to be faster, to be, more valuable?
Right. I think there's really three key things. One is you need to think about the role that you're playing, right? It's not a position that you have. You're playing a role within a team. And that means you basically need to keep fresh from a technology perspective. So you need to learn. Always learn new technology. It's amazing the speed as to which new technology are being deployed in the marketplace. I agree that people will specialize in specific areas, but you need to be aware of what's going on so you don't make yourself irrelevant in the process. So really being that leader from a technology perspective to learn new things that you can apply to what you do on a day-to-day basis. A good example that we use, so my team basically creates software that we ship to client. So people that ship software, you have to support different version of the OSs, different databases, blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of effort to test the compatibility for all that. A couple of years ago, one of our engineers had the bright idea, well, let's put it on Docker and ship it on Docker. The client can just install Docker and we're done. We don't have to worry about compatibility. So all of our product have gone that route. It came from one engineer that just was tinkering and learning new technology. And the third piece is you need to be a leader within your team. And the leader doesn't necessarily have to be the guy that's rah, right? Just somebody that's out there looking at the entire process and just being curious about how do you define requirements, how do you define better requirements, how do you do CI/CD, how do you ensure security? Because as leaders, you can't keep up with new technology, you can't keep up about the best practices, just stay fresh.
Well, great. I just want to close by thanking our panelists. The goal here is hopefully you come away and say, well, I can be more valuable, right? I can be more valuable to my organizations. I can be more valuable to my organization's customers. And customers aren't necessarily external customers. That can be internal customers as well. And by being more valuable to your customers, you're increasing your own personal value. So, thank you. A round of applause for our panelists. And now let's eat lunch. Thanks.